Hello, fellow Helldivers! I know it's been a little bit, almost a year, since my first examination into Terminid biology, and I promised more. The thing is, I hit a snag. A lot of snags. Mysteries plagued me anytime I thought about Terminids. How do Terminids get to other planets? If Terminids live underground, why are there egg nurseries above? Should I leave the oven on?
The bugs are back.
But now that we're finally entering the Gloom and seeing such a radical change in Terminids, it's time for me to stop hiding from the difficult questions and push forward into the light of discovery. Today's Terminid biology is going to be all about the mysterious fungal growth that seems to be a companion of Terminid life. We'll explore what it might be, why it seems to be so important to Terminid life, and if it might hold the true answer to how Terminids travel across space. Obey my cat! Hit the subscribe button. Something a lot of us Helldivers have noticed is that on planets with a Terminid presence, there is a large amount of mushrooms and fungal growth. I mean, hell, there's these giant spore spewer towers that make vision difficult in proximity to them because they're letting off so many spores. There's no questions that mushrooms have been here from the beginning, but why is it here wherever the Terminids are, and how much of it is fungus? It's a lot more than you probably think. This rocky looking material that's in areas around Terminid nests is distinctly different from natural rock formations on every planet we see the bugs. Take a close look at this rock and you'll see that there's a stringy slime not just smeared over their surfaces, but it actually seems to be in the rock itself. And that's because I think that they aren't rock at all. These are actually fungus. Fungus and mushrooms are actually fascinating life forms. They're not plants because they can't photosynthesize to make their own food, but they're also not animals because they don't internally digest their food, among many other reasons why they don't fit into either classification. Instead, they belong to a kingdom all on their own called fungi. Fungi have some really unique traits besides being the life of the party. I'm sorry, that was a terrible pun. One of their most interesting features is that fungi have chitinous cell walls. If you missed the first Terminid biology, one of the ways that Terminids are similar to actual bugs from Earth is they have hard exoskeletons made of a substance called chitin, and fungus cell walls are also made of the same material. The actual form and function of chitin in bug exoskeletons and fungal cell walls are incredibly different, but the fact remains that they share that unique similarity. And I bring this up because going back to the rocky looking fungal structures, it looks pretty dang similar in color and texture to Terminid exoskeletons. This is where it's important to point out that we're not dealing with biology of species from planet Earth. Terminids and this fungus are alien life forms, so this is Xenobiology. And yeah, it's also science fiction and not real, but damn it, you have to let me have some fun. It very well may be that because these are alien creatures, the chitin that makes up the Terminid exoskeletons and the chitin of these structures might actually be the same material. And that is actually a great segue into one of our big questions for this video. What do the fungus and the Terminids have to do with each other? Why is the fungus found everywhere the Terminids have nests and more permanent structures? There's actually insects on Earth in real life that have symbiotic relationships with fungi, and it seems that the Terminid relationship to this alien fungus may be somewhat modeled after those. The first type of relationship we'll look at is that of the leafcutter ants. Leafcutter ants are famous for, well, exactly what it sounds like, carrying around big chunks of leaf that they've cut with their strong mandibles and carrying them back to their colony. The interesting thing that you may not have known is that they don't actually eat the leaves themselves. Instead, leafcutter ants use these to provide decaying matter to feed to their own food, a fungus that I'm not even going to try to pronounce its name right now. Yep, leafcutter ants eat fungus, and more than that, they actually cultivate the conditions for it to thrive within their own nests and essentially farm it. Now take a look at what those fungus farms look like that are found inside their nests and compare it to the rock-like structures that we see on Terminid worlds. Pretty damn interesting, right? They look fairly similar. So Terminids may be cultivating and building their fungal food structures above ground where the fungal spores are spewing abundantly and the growths have a chance to begin, and possibly even using it as substrate to lay their eggs in for either protection or nourishment while they grow, explaining why these nurseries exist above the surface when Terminids themselves seem to live underground. Now, if you watched the first Terminid biology video, you may be thinking, but Joe, didn't you say Terminids probably eat humans? And that's what I originally thought. It seemed like the best explanation to me at the time as to why we find bodies collected and mass amounts of human skeletons in their nests. But that was past Joe, and she was an idiot. This Joe did more research and has a new hypothesis. Remember how I said leafcutter ants use the leaves they collect as decaying material to feed to the fungus they farm? Yeah. You know what else decays and can also be consumed by fungi? That's right, human flesh! Since Terminids have to actively fight humans to defend themselves, it makes sense that they wouldn't just let all of that perfectly good organic material go to waste and instead drag it to their fungal farms to spruce up the place and keep their main source of food growing. Terminids consuming humans, well, again, the best educated guess I had at the time, never sat 100% right with me for a few reasons. As I established in the last video, Terminids are most likely warm-blooded or something similar to it because we actively see their breath in the cold, and also because they can fight us just as efficiently in the cold environments as hot environments, which implies a few really important things. Being able to see their breath in the cold implies that they have an internal body temperature significantly warmer than the environment around them, which is a big signal that Terminids are in fact warm-blooded. Cold-blooded creatures have an internal body temperature generally pretty close to the temperature outside of their bodies. Fish swimming in 80-degree Fahrenheit water will have an internal temperature pretty close to 80 degrees. For a lot of cold-blooded animals, this means that when exposed to extremely cold conditions like we see on the planet of Istanu, for example, those animals will likely be slower and less dangerous because they would start flirting with going into hibernation at best, or at worst, be at risk of freezing to death. This very clearly is not the case with Terminids. Being cold-blooded can be an advantage because it means that you don't have to burn calories to sustain a constant body temperature. Your meals can last you a lot longer and you can go further between meals compared to warm-blooded animals because you can just go sun yourself on a rock to stay warm and cozy and take a nap when it gets cold. Unlike us dumb mammals who have to have consistent caloric intake to maintain our correct internal body temperature, which means that larger Terminids would likely need to eat a lot to sustain themselves. Depending on the type, Terminids can be massive, far eclipsing the largest land animal on planet Earth with a bile titan, and even the impalers and chargers are gargantuan compared to most animals we're familiar with on Earth. If Terminids are warm-blooded and some portion of their species are also massive, that's going to require an equally colossal food source to help sustain themselves. While we finally started seeing some urban environments on the planets in Helldivers 2 that show that there is a decent population of humans grouped together, it still isn't quite on the scale of what I would have expected to be able to support the evolution of something on the scale of a bile titan. If these rocky formations that we see across Terminid-controlled planets are a type of fungus that they farm and build up as a food source, overall, this is probably significantly more biomass than the total available through humans for their consumption, especially given that we know many of the Terminids have acid spit that could probably help aid in digesting bones, but we see piles of human skeletons left behind in their nests. They aren't eating humans, they're using them to help supplement growing their own food and are able to grow more fungus than they would if the fungus was just breaking down things like plant matter and other nutrient-rich sources more passively, which is honestly kind of a poetic justice considering that humans use Terminid decaying bodies as starship fuel. But does the relationship between Terminids and the fungus go deeper than just a food source? Let's crack into the question I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for. How do Terminids spread from planet to planet? There's a lot of different theories out there, and honestly, they are all viable. Let me just start by saying that the Gloom is made up of the spores. We've gotten that information from the game that confirms this more or less. Some of the most popular theories on how Terminids travel through space that I've seen hinge on the idea that the spores are actually Terminid eggs, which would mean that the Terminids are also an animal-like fungus, or a fungus-like animal, whichever. Interplanetary travel options that fit into this theory are: number one, Terminid spores are being carried by humans themselves on things like their clothing and shoes from planet to planet without the humans even knowing that they're doing it because the spores are microscopic. Those spores then grow into Terminid eggs and their populations begin to spring up. Theory number two is that the fungal spores ejected from the spore spewers are actually able to leave planetary atmosphere and drip through space, eventually entering the atmosphere of other planets and seeding Terminid life there, and eventually again, the spores turn into eggs. Like I said, these are completely viable and reasonable theories. They're also the simplest, most straightforward theories, and we love a way to explain things that adheres to Occam's razor. But there's one sticking point with the idea that fungal spores grow into Terminid eggs, and that's if the Terminids were a completely fungal life form like orcs from Warhammer 40k, why would they bother having an egg or larva stage at all? If the Terminids were a fungal life form, it'd be reasonable to look at all the individual members of their species as completely unique types of growths that don't mature into other forms. So the scavengers are just scavengers and that's all they ever will be, pouncers and hunters are completely static and never grow into other Terminid forms, etc. But that just doesn't seem to be the case. Missions in Helldivers 2 tell us outright that Terminids grow from eggs. We're dispatched to go eradicate their egg clutches before they hatch in their nursery. And after my first Terminid biology video where I pointed out that the Terminid larval form was missing, Arrowhead actually added it to the game. You can now find a Terminid larva in a jar and bring it back for examination by the Ministry of Science. These parts of the life cycle heavily imply that Terminids themselves reproduce sexually, not in a sexual method like spore germination. So if Terminids don't come from the spores themselves, how do they travel from planet to planet? This haunted me for a long time. No matter what idea I had, I couldn't figure out anything that really seemed to fit Terminid life and what we see with the environments they control in the game just right. One idea I mulled over was that the spores themselves were a type of terraforming. Instead of growing into Terminid eggs, the spores would contain the essential building blocks needed for Terminid life to begin evolving on a new planet, like amino acids and other compounds. But something about that still didn't feel quite right. Terminids are extremely similar to arthropods we have on Earth. They're able to breathe the same gas as humans are, they move freely in gravity similar to Earth-like conditions, and the fact they can thrive on planets where humans can also comfortably live heavily implies that they are also carbon-based life forms, so they wouldn't really need to terraform these planets. But the idea of Terminid primordial soup did give me another idea. You may not have ever noticed this, but there are swarms of tiny bugs that fly around in Terminid nesting areas, either just ambiently or showing up sometimes if you step on the right fungal growths on the ground. And I've always wondered why these were present other than just cool environmental flavor for the setting in the video game. Bugs this tiny would likely have extremely tiny eggs, possibly being on par with the size and weight of spores. If these tiny eggs were to be laid on spore spewers, they might get ejected along with the spores that exit a planet's atmosphere, eventually traveling through space to other planets. With an incredibly fast life cycle, generations of these bugs could start on a new planet without anyone noticing due to their small size, until they developed in such a quick time that could even be possibly a matter of weeks, and the Terminid invasion is already unable to be stopped before anyone even realizes it's begun. However Terminid life spreads throughout the galaxy, the idea that it spreads by spore is our best candidate. We've yet to see anything to give us an indication that they have some way to achieve space travel on their own, like biological ships, or even spreading by asteroid impacts. The craters we see on Terminid planets aren't really craters at all. They lack the signs of ejected dust and debris outward from the crater and formations like shatter cones. Given the fact the spores seem to be somewhat confirmed to be responsible for the gloom, it's our best working theory because that cloud spans entire systems in space. There's one other really interesting theory that would explain how this spore cloud expands Terminid life from planet to planet, and that's if the fungus spores are infectious and able to take over a host species in a similar way to the real-life fungus Cordyceps. You've probably heard of this one. It's what the fungal infection that causes the apocalypse in The Last of Us test is based on. Cordyceps is only able to infect a particular species of ant in real life, but once that ant is infected with the spores, the fungus takes over the host's nervous system. The fungus begins to grow inside of the ant, and it's compelled to leave its nest and attach itself to the underside of the leaf. Eventually, a mushroom bursts from the ant's head. The mushroom is then able to release its spores to propagate itself, and the host ant dies. We actually have seen some evidence for a fungal infection that behaves somewhat similarly in Terminids, but without the fungus itself being outright fatal to the host. The spore chargers have bulbous growths inside of their body that emit spore clouds as they roam around. Spore clouds that are similar in the color of the fog effect that tends to shroud Terminid nesting areas. So these protruding growths are most likely some kind of fungus. Even going all the way back to Helldivers 1, there were certain bugs like the shadow variants of the stalkers who were known to use spores to call other bugs to their location. Fungal life is fascinating, and scientists on our real-life planet Earth are still studying them to this day. In fact, in the last few years, there's been studies showing that fungus are able to communicate through methods like biochemical signals, electrical impulses sent across their networks of strands, and they may even have rudimentary intelligence and cellular memory. Could it be possible that this fungus, the Gloom itself, is some kind of ancient intelligent space fungus that infects a planet's native arthropod species and turns them into Terminids? I don't think I've encountered a planet or a moon yet in Helldivers 2 that had absolutely zero signs of agriculture or plant life on its surface, and that's important because where there's plant life, especially crops to sustain a food chain, there's probably bugs. There are definitely native non-Terminid insect species that we see on different planets in Helldivers, and the rare planets that seem to not have any insect life, no matter where you look, still have evidence that they used to have flowers and other plant life growing on them that likely would have required pollinators to help them propagate. All this to say, I think it's totally possible that every planet we find Terminids on had one or possibly multiple native species of insects that this fungus may have found suitable hosts, and when the spores floating in space find their way to these new planets and come into contact with the native bugs, it infects them and begins the mutation process. And last but not least, there is one more theory I have on how Terminids may travel through space, and that's that they don't. Terminids may have been present on these planets since the First Galactic War. This is a possibility I bring up because many of the planets in the Terminid portion of the Galactic War map have desiccated Hive Lord husks on them. They're not goopy like many of the more recently dead Terminids you can find on maps, and the Hive Lords also frequently have skeletonized SAEF soldiers near them. This is a big hint that it's been quite a long time since these bodies died, which means that the Terminids have likely just been chilling out on a lot of these planets. Granted, I haven't combed through every planet in Terminid control since the start of Helldivers 2, so I can't say for sure, but it definitely felt like it was worth mentioning. So there you have it. That covers a lot of the information we can glean about the mysterious Gloom fungus and Terminid life, but there's always more to learn. Honestly, there's still a lot to dig into about E710 alone, especially since it's becoming a major narrative in Helldivers 2, and also, what the hell are these mysterious eggs in the mega nests? Want to come along on our next science expedition? Become a channel member, join the Patreon, or subscribe to me on Twitch and be in the loop on when I'll be diving in the name of science. You might just get to see your Helldiver in the next video. If you're not something of a scientist yourself and you just want to spread the joy of managed democracy to the fascist masses, then come drop in on the next stream and join me for a round. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you Helldivers the next time I drop in for some good old-fashioned liberation. Thanks so much to these amazing, beautiful people for your continued support. Leah S., Ben, Cameron, and Andrew Brown over on Patreon, and Nicholas Velardes, Vadrazel, John Brash, The Communist Crusader, Macrove, Big Guy, and Daniel Gerber, who are YouTube channel members. Thank you guys all so much. I couldn't do this without you.